Hi, everyone. My name is Suzanne Farron. I am the Freda Lindeman Professor and Chair of the Music Department here at Hunter College. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to the next Music Talks and Tea. For this evening, my tea of choice is Lady Grey. So I hope you're enjoying your warm beverage. Tonight, we have the wonderful, wonderful pleasure of sharing our time with Professor Erin Gee. Erin Gee is a highly respected composer whose work has been recognized by nearly every institution in the musical ecosphere. She's the recipient of a Guggenheim Fellowship, a Rome Prize, a Radcliffe Fellowship, the Charles Ives Fellowship from the American Academy of Arts and Letters, many commissions from all around the world, and performances by the most prolific ensembles of our times on stages of international importance, such as Zankel Hall here in New York City, to Zurich Opera. She is currently assistant professor of composition at Brandeis University, where she teaches composition. I love her music for its sincerity, its lightness of being, its brilliant craft, and its expressive power. Her series of mouthpiece works clearly start with an exploration of her own instrument, but they are not written only for her. They express a sort of universality of sound and speech that is both touching and playful at the same time, almost like a language that we once knew how to speak but somehow forgot along the way. I know that my colleagues, David Fulmer and Schaefer Mahoney, will agree that it is an honor for us to host Professor Erin Gee at our Music Talks and Tea this evening. Welcome, Erin. Please turn on your video. There you are. Okay. Hey, Erin. So great to have you here.
It's so great to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really looking forward to talking to everyone.
Oh my gosh, it's a dream. It's a dream. I'm so glad it could work out. And I just also want to say, and you've heard me say this many times, but you're also on my short list of favorite teachers. And my composers know that because I talk about you all the time. But you're also one of the people I feel out of all my colleagues that, you know, is as brilliant of a teacher as well as an artist. And I think that's a really special combination.
Oh,
And so
you.
I really treasure you in so many levels. So it's lovely to have you here. And this is a series that's sponsored by the Hunter Music Department. And the whole idea is that we get to hear you speak, and you're going to share a presentation of your work with us. And then we're going to have interaction and questions and answers from the Zoom and from the live stream. So those of you who are on the Zoom, depending on how big we are, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question, or you can raise your hand and I will call on you when we're finished with the presentation part. And if you're on the live stream and you want to stay on the live stream, that's fine. Just type your questions in the chat and they'll get to me and I will ask them on your behalf to Professor Gee. Sound good? Okay, well then I will shut off my video and turn the stage over to you, Erin. And thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you. Oh, good. Okay, I'm excited. Hey. Well, anyway, I'm looking forward to everyone's questions as well. So I will start in. Okay, so welcome everyone. I'm looking forward to talking to you and hearing your questions. I'm going to just jump in, talk about the Mouthpiece series, and we'll listen to some music. I'll go into some detail. Yeah, but feel free to be as detailed with your questions when we get around to the question time. So the first piece in this Mouthpiece series, it's Mouthpiece 1, but it actually was just Mouthpiece in the beginning. I didn't initially intend to write a series, but I wrote this piece for my graduate class called Words and Music, taught by Jeremy Dale Roberts, who's a fantastic visiting professor at the University of Iowa. And the requirement was to write a piece for solo voice for the final project. I really struggled with it. And although I was influenced by Berio and Ligeti, I started asking myself some questions And I also started working on the piece on my own voice. So one thing I did was to have a handheld tape recorder, and I recorded myself sort of improvising very small bits of vocal sounds. And one requirement was that I wanted them to be so difficult that I had to relearn them from the tape recorder instead of being able to just repeat them. So I would make some sounds, relearn it from the tape recorder, edit and increase the length, and then re-record, relearn, and so on. So as I said, I was influenced by Barrio and Ligeti. But as you know, they are wonderful pieces and very theatrical songs, strong sense of drama, and heightened emotion occurs at various intervals. And the question that I had was, if we're moving away from language, is there another direction to go? So I'm going to play for you now a bit of this first mouthpiece, and I'll keep talking about it. So I'll stop there, but we'll keep talking about it. So the first, a few questions arose, and these surrounded how I was going to structure the sounds of this piece, because when you move away from text, of course, you have to come up with your own ordering of these sounds. And I was also later very influenced by this concept of the phoneme, which is the smallest particle of speech that distinguishes the meaning of a word for a native speaker. So in this piece here, I use actually the construction of a Sanskrit verse. Riksho akshare parame vyoman is how it starts out. And I kept, to some extent, the ordering of the sounds the same, but changed in each individual sound beyond recognition. So the first word is riksho. So the first sound is and the second sound is ksh. And the third sound is whistle. So the third sound in this text is O. So I kept the mouth shape the same and transformed the actual sound into a whistle. So that was my sort of background ordering scheme for much of this first piece. And in terms of larger form, it's very simple verse refrain, although every time the refrain comes back, it's changed, but you can see there's some repetitions. Also the number of pitches is highly reduced. There is also one extra pitch right at the very end. But since I was sort of expanding in so many directions with the actual sounds themselves coming from my mouth, the other categories of musical material, I decided to reduce them. And this is this reduction or constriction of materials I find really rewarding, and I find it very inspiring actually to get a lot of material out of a kind of refined space. So I enjoy doing that. So as I said, there's this concept of the phoneme. Now, many of you have studied probably the International Phonetic Alphabet. I was influenced particularly in the second iteration of the notation. So the first time I had finished the piece, I went into my lesson with Jeremy Dale Roberts. I said, well, I didn't know how to notate it, so some scratchings on this piece of paper. So I'll just sing it for you so that you can hear it. So I sang this little mouthpiece, and he said to me, and you will be performing that at the next composer's concert. I was, completely shocked. I was not a singer. I'm not trained as a vocalist. I don't have a bel canto background. Yes, I was shocked. And I thought, okay, well, just this once, I guess I can, get through just this one performance. So anyway, by way of saying, the next time I worked on the notation, Professor Jeremy Dale Roberts said to me, "Oh, you should, study this IPA." So I did. So then the notation started to follow the IPA. Some of the pops don't show up in the IPA. So the IPA is for all known languages, all known sounds in all known languages, but not for every sound that the mouth can make. So, but it's extremely useful, and I really enjoy using it. I particularly enjoy the consonants. So you see here on the left, vertically, we have the type of consonant, and across the top is the place of articulation. And it starts up at the lips, and it just moves back. Back and down. So I find the fricative was really kind of a wonderful world that I stepped into. Fricative means that you're constricting the place where the air is being pressed through. So you're constricting an area of your mouth and pressing air through it. So these first two, and we have two categories. On the left is unvoiced, and on the right is voiced. So the first two, bilabial, two lips, we have fricative. So constricting the lips and then forcing the air through. And this goes all the way back. The only one that's not that way is the retroflex, in the sense that it's not a complete line back to the back of your throat. In the retroflex, you turn your tongue up like that, and force air through with an upturned tongue. So this is the story of this first mouthpiece. And the other element of construction was that I made lots of lists of different kinds of sounds that I could make. So it was kind of exploratory lists. What can I do with my mouth? And at the same time, I think from a philosophical standpoint, I was reading a lot of John Cage, and I was considering the possibility of erasing a kind of heightened character or personality person on stage, which is a complete impossibility. This notion of sort of the human and non-human. So I'm on stage as a human, and it would be impossible to sort of say that I wasn't a human, but I was interested in that impossibility, that I wasn't communicating in a method that sort of conveyed character, kind of an erasing of the ego. So that was interesting to me for this first piece, and for many pieces, actually. The whole series would be in many ways. So this is the Sanskrit verse that I was talking about that I used for the structure of mouthpiece 1. And here's that first line. It comes from riksho akshare parame vyoman. And there we are. So moving on, I'm going to talk about a structure, kind of a similar but expanded structure for the Yamaguchi mouthpiece 3. I was invited, well, I applied to this Akiyoshidai International Art Village. One was asked to submit a proposal in which you studied some aspect of Japanese culture and then used it to influence the creation of your artwork. It was a beautiful space, really wonderful people who were running that program. And I was there with 4 other artists in different disciplines for 3 months. And it was in the Yamaguchi prefecture. of Japan, near the town of Yamaguchi. So these are my Yamaguchi pieces. I was most influenced by the study of the traditional Japanese music Edo Nagauta, and particularly this notion of rhythmic interjection, kakegoe, which it sort of manifests in different ways. One of the ways that it manifests is here by the first juta player. This is an ensemble style. You can see this is in all of the players. The first juta player performs or gives interjections, rhythmic interjections, to give information about where they are in the form of the piece. So that, in particular, I liked this particularly because it was a very short sound. And as you can see, I was influenced, or I was just very interested in building with short sounds, building blocks. And you can see that sort of throughout my work, a kind of building of small pieces that then create some sort of shape. So, and this person was also not a trained vocalist, a trained juta player, or not the vocalist, I should say, for the piece. The vocalists are to the left of him. So I was inspired by his performance. So this is the first Yamaguchi mouthpiece, and I will play just a little bit of this so you get a feel for it, and then I'm going to talk about the structure of the third Yamaguchi mouthpiece. Okay, so here's the third Yamaguchi mouthpiece, and first I'll play this whole piece for you. It's about 2 minutes, and then I'll go into the details of the structure. Okay, so the way I said about working with the sounds in this piece is that I constructed 2 groups of sounds. You can think of them as actually just group A and group B, but I called them vowels and consonants. So my own self-defined vowels and self-defined consonants. So I'm just going to sort of sing these for you so you get a sense of what they sound like. Vowels, number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, and then the consonants, simamana, So I have these two groups. And then I took another Sanskrit phrase, sahana bhavatu, sahana bhunaktu, and I took the vowel consonant construction of this phrase. And each time there was a consonant in the phrase, I took a sound from the consonant category. And each time there was a vowel, I took a sound from the vowel category. So let's back up for 1 second. And I was able to choose any of these vowels and any of these consonants at the moment that I was choosing. And additionally, I was able to, of course, vary them. I could change them from whispered to voiced and various other changes. I'll show you the list of the parameters of my variation. But you can see here that this is how I've circled like consonant 1, vowel 1, consonant 3, vowel 1, consonant 1, and so on. So this is me following the consonant vowel pattern of this other Sanskrit text. So using that as a model. So here is you can see it again, vowel consonant construction. Okay, so here we have just a close up. So that's that section, and it follows the consonant vowel consonant vowel consonant vowel consonant vowel. Here's the list of kinds of variation. So I was very interested in this notion of how much can you vary something and keep the identity the same, or sort of understand some of the boundaries of the identity. So they're very basic variation technique. I mean, register, pitch, duration, voiced or unvoiced, stretched or compressed, so augmentation or diminution. And then the last one, I still kept that variation that I did for the first mouthpiece, that the round O of the mouth can be transformed into a whistle. So there's that, again, just kind of the mapping of that construction. So the linguistic principle that I found really interesting that paired with this is this concept of the allophone. So variation on a phoneme, an alternate pronunciation that doesn't change the meaning of the word. So there are many in English. This aspirated and unaspirated is one example. So if you put your hand in front of your mouth and you say pin, you have this puff of air. And if you say spin, you don't have a puff of air. So, but we could also say spin with a big puff of air, and we would not change the meaning of the word spin, because aspiration or big puff of air is not a phoneme, it's an allophone. It's an alternate pronunciation, but does not change the meaning of that word. So this I found fascinating. This is a kind of exercise or research into the identity of the boundary of the sound, so I thought about this, and it's a metaphor, of course, because I wasn't working in meaning, sound and meaning. I was just working with phonetics, but still, I found this fascinating. Okay, moving on to incorporating the voice and the ensemble. So Mouthpiece 7, I wrote that for myself and Klang Form Bean, and that was a challenging piece, and I wrote a hard part for myself, which was fun to perform in the end, and difficult. So this piece, I thought about incorporating the mouth, my mouth, into this piece in a way like refracting and reflecting the sounds of the voice into the ensemble to create a kind of a super mouth. So I can pop and sing, and I can whistle and sing, but I can't pop and whistle and sing at the same time. So with the help of the ensemble, then we are sort of creating this super mouth. We can do more than I would be able to do individually. So I'm going to play this whole piece for you, and you can hear the whistle, and the descending whistle goes into the strings, to the glissando and the harmonics, the high harmonics, and also into the crotales are hit with metal and dipped into water, so their sound goes down. So that's just one example. We can talk about more examples afterwards. And after you listen to it, I'll tell you about the form of it as well. Okay, so that piece, what I was thinking about that piece, I thought about a form called small dirty mirror. And so I had a mirror actually that was very small. And I thought about, you know, if you're writing like this is sort of where you're writing, and then you place the mirror on the score or up some distance, and that depending on the angle of the mirror, you're going to reflect back some small amount of the material that you have just written. And so I imagined that I was taking this material and bringing it forward and sort of constantly bringing it forward, but different heights and different amounts of it still, but the mirror is still quite small. Also, the mirror is dirty. So the material that you're bringing forward is somehow changed when you bring it forward. And this is how I thought about constructing this piece. I did this because I wanted to maintain a somewhat static amount of energy throughout the piece, but to have a very high level of activity on the surface level of the music. So that was that piece. Also, in terms of harmony, I thought for most of the piece that the material would just be 2 notes, so dyad, and then any moment there would be 3 notes would be a big moment. So that is that one. The other notion about this, I remember I talked about kind of erasing the ego a little bit and sort of removing character. Well, so when you put a person in front of an ensemble, I felt like I needed to again re-question myself in terms of kind of presenting a soloist or presenting a character or something, and how am I going to sort of work out this erasing of the self in such a presentational style. So I did stand a bit back in the ensemble, and then I also just at some point submerged the voice down into the lower register. And it's not that you can't hear the voice, but it's very difficult to pinpoint the voice when it's lower, especially if it's imitating the trombone, like so this kind of technique I just used to sort of have the voice dive down into the mix and then sort of re-emerge. So that was part of the technique there. The percussion was very helpful in this refraction process as well. I used a spring drum for the first time, duck call, udu, actual springs from the hardware store, and some clicking. I spent a good amount of time at the Austrian version of, was like the clicking store, like the switch store. That's what it was. Turning off lights and things, all the things that clicked you could buy in one store. So Then I thought I would talk about the mouthpiece and the orchestra, mouthpiece 9. The first one, orchestra. So the orchestra is sort of a larger beast. It moves in a different way, sort of slower, larger. And so let's listen to a bit of this. Actually, we're just going to listen to a little bit of the first movement and a little bit of the second movement. So the first movement is repeated, straight, fully repeated, and it's much shorter. It's about 3 minutes, and then it's repeated. It's meant to be kind of grounding, both harmonically, but also in the presentation or the voice, the relationship of the voice and the instruments. And the second movement is much, it really sort of unwinds and unravels itself and dissolves into kind of a quite spacey material towards the end. So that you won't hear all of that tonight, but that's what I wanted for the 2 parts. So kind of I wanted the first part to be a little more grounded, and the second is very dissolving in nature. Oops. Okay, and then I will play, oh, someone says cannot play with me. Okay, no second part today. I'll make it go. Okay, I'll stop it there. Just because I want time for questions, but we can listen to more later. But you could hear, and I wanted to show you some of that because in this piece, I think I used the instruments to transform the voice. You heard a few examples of that. First one was the voice. So it happens most often when there's a pitch unison, and the voice. So I was doing singing with a Caccini trill, but also the flute was on the same pitch and kind of exacerbating the trill or the instability of the vocal part. And then after that, it was kind of amplified even more by a double trill on top of the same pitch of the voice that I was singing in the voice. And then in the long section where it's the kind of the ostinato and the strings, yeah, each of the unisons with the different instrument, it just I wanted to get the balance right so that the fusion started to happen in our ear, so that we could that it was almost like the transformation of the voice into something else, as a kind of, yeah, almost like a fusion, and just a magic moment of disbelief, maybe, or of new believing in something new, that new kind of vocal sound through the fusion with the instrument part. So I can stop for questions, and then we can listen to more, just as you like.
That's great. Thank you so much, Erin. That
Yeah.
was really wonderful. I think everyone could unmute and clap for a second or clap. It's so hard to do this without the feedback of like being in a room with people and knowing and seeing their bodies move with what you've written. But I promise we were all like moving around and thinking and really immersed in your language. And you reminded me of something that I find so powerful about our practice generally is that it is like it is like uh, almost like a muscle we learn to use of empathy and empathetic impulse that we can go into the world of someone else, into your creative
Mm,
mind. So to go into your language is to do exactly what you just ended with, which is to go into a world, a new world, and to now rethink the voice, to rethink. You made me think a lot about the flute, even just you make me rethink what newness is. I really heard that third voice interrupting or joining in almost in a kind of asteroidish way into your language. And so it's a practice of understanding the worlds of other people. And
mm.
in your case, it's such a rich world and it's such a fascinating and thoughtful place. And thank you for taking us there.
Thank you. That was my pleasure. Absolutely.
Yay. So if you want to stop screen
Yeah.
sharing, we can get into the vibe of comp seminar, guys. You know what this is. So who has a question in the Zoom for Erin? We're also taking questions from, let me get my teleprompter up here. We're taking questions from the live stream as well. Erin, I was curious about um, your approach to orchestration because I was thinking of a meta voice, a meta voice rather than super mouth, although I like super mouth. It's like a super ball. um, Especially in your piece for Jack, where I was like, oh my God. And in your piece for Jack, it sounds like you have created a solfege system for yourself
Uh,
and you could almost solfege that whole piece.
yeah.
In
Yeah.
the in the pieces for orchestra is a little different, but in Jack I felt like I could recognize all of these small elements, like you were just saying, these building blocks of sounds, like a soul, almost like
Mhm.
a even more microscopic solfege system.
Mhm.
And I could see the way they were playing out and being magnified and doing things that one mouth can't do.
Mhm.
You know, kind of like the meta string instrument, like a quartet.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, what I hear also in your especially in the pieces for orchestra, but even anytime you just have more than you, that you're writing for processes like interference and friction and things that you're doing in
Yeah.
your singing and in your making of sound. You're not creating, there's not maybe so much actual interference happening in the orchestra, but you are creating the affect of interference.
Oh,
Like your da, 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 those kind of like I feel like I hear you create a sense of beating, for example,
yes.
without just making the sounds have a beating effect there. You're creating that.
Yeah. Yeah. That is true. I mean, that is great. That is great. I think I just naturally, yes, kind of rewrite some things that are maybe happening in my mouth, and I write them
Yeah.
maybe, and they're slower or they're louder or they're something. Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I like that. Um, cool. Yeah. And the Jack Quartet thing is great. And it's because they are like one unit.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, so you can make them do things as fast as you would move your tongue from the teeth to the
Yes.
whatever else.
Yes.
So, and I have that all queued up too. So if we want to hear that,
Oh, that would
the
be
Jack,
great. Awesome.
we can
That's
want
yeah.
to hear like the first 10 seconds of it or something, first phrase.
Sure. Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay.
And then we're going to have a question from Alyssa.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, it's so funny.
Yeah.
Because as you said,
It's great.
I realized, so when they're quite high and then there's the viola goes,
Yeah.
that, that reminded me of me in Mouthpiece 7 is the only time I actually wrote pitches for whistling and singing at the same time, and in counterpoint. So I had to actually sing the counterpoint.
Yeah. Nice.
It's like so much easier if they do it.
Everything's easier when the Jack does it. Great, thank you. I loved hearing that again. So cosmic also. Alyssa, why don't you unmute yourself and ask your question? Alyssa Regent is a master's student at Hunter.
Hi.
Hi.
So my question is more in terms of orchestration. For the piece for orchestra, how do you treat the voice as a melodic element and then you orchestrate around the voice, or you just try to have more of an equal balance with all the instruments and the voice?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it's different in different places. And in the beginning, it is, you can probably hear it's treated like a melodic, a little bit more melodic, a little bit more, and that's how I wrote it. I think I improvised the top part and, edited. Often a lot of my process is just improvisation and then a strong amount of editing. Yeah, so you can kind of hear that, but still, some sort of elements that cross over. Some of the noisy sounds of my voice or the sounds that I'm making are falling into the orchestral part. And the glissandi right from the beginning are important, because you heard probably then in the second section they get a little bit more out of hand and a little bit less. Like it feels like things are falling apart, especially the really long ones that I did have. I did have the winds who are not designed to do a long glissandi. I did ask the winds to do it, and they were covered by all the strings. So I knew I was going to get very weird moments when the winds, even though they're covered by the strings, they each start to go at a different moment to get to the next note, because they really can't. So that so I guess what I'm saying is that in the first part there was a kind of a solidity and of the voice, and then the second part I started to work more with erasing the voice, so that what you hear after, so you hear it kind of breaks down and becomes a sort of just a percussive element. Then it gets sort of transformed by these unison fusions with other instruments. Then what you didn't hear a little bit later is that it just goes into whispered sounds, and the entire orchestra is whistling at the same time, and I'm whistling, and then there's some tiny little whispers. So this dissolution of what we sort of, or maybe what I had presented in the beginning of kind of a more solid vocal sound in relation to an ensemble starts to dissipate and disappear, long quiet sections. And then the final part of it is there is actually a quote, a Bach quote that is it's transformed, so it's all entirely glissandi. So in the last part, so I think the whole thing, it's like in some way the relationship to the language, which is I'm sort of unraveling, and the unraveling of the Bach quote is the sort of also then unraveling of that, beautiful tonal language. And then it's, it's all just like a whispered kind of exit at the end. So, so yeah, thanks for your question. But yeah, so I think I was thinking about the changing relationship of the voice as the piece projected.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, good question.
Yeah, great. I had a thought for the group based on something that you said. You made this beautiful observation that the reduction of resources is something that's really important to you. And you didn't use the word liberation, but I kept thinking that as I was hearing you speak, that you were sort of liberated by the reduction of resources.
Yeah.
And, of course, everyone knows that famous, perhaps mythological statement by Stravinsky that, is terrified of the blank page. But let's hear from folks. What about this idea of reduction of resources? Do you feel liberated as a composer when you can reduce? How do you reduce? Did that ring true and resonate with you when you heard Erin discussing the way she manages material? David?
Yes, thanks, Suzanne, and thank you, Erin, for such a beautiful presentation and such an inspiring one. Erin, I was particularly struck going along what Suzanne had just articulated, the sort of reduction of resources and your materials. When I think of moving away from language and linguistics and working with the cell structure of phonemes and phonetic qualities, I'm immediately sort of touched by your textures in your works, because at once they are extremely homogeneous and at other times completely spontaneous. Of course, those can occur simultaneously. I'm wondering how you feel about our sort of two words in our toolbox of form and structure, and how we navigate from, say, page 1 or the top of Mouthpiece 9 to, say, the 2.5-minute mark. My own experiences with it, having been a very long time admirer of your music, I often find the more I listen to it, it's very kaleidoscopic. So the more I listen to it, the greater shape and form take place, simply because I'm turning that kaleidoscope and I'm being exposed to more. And I'm wondering, you as the performer and composer, how you make decisions in the architectural segment of the construction.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think early on I was very influenced by or just curious about forms that didn't have a dramatic high point, so you can probably guess that. And so I was thinking about other kinds of forms, like thus the Small Dirty Mirror, but in some way, Small Dirty Mirror, when you talk about it, it's also kaleidoscopic in that, like, I am turning and I'm returning to material and finding it, sort of refinding it, like reusing it, but also like, what else is in here? What else is in, what else is going on in here? And so I really was interested in this. It's in a kind of a return, but not a return, like never the same. Although I have like big, repeat signs, but I mean, the actual, it was like, it's like it is a kind of a kaleidoscope. That's a great term for it. And then I kind of would try to push in some other direction. So like the string quartet that we just heard, the beginning of it, I mean, that one actually I was trying, this new form, which I then called the magnet form. So there, in that piece, there are like two nodes where it all sort of like syncs up, and they're really like playing this kind of really much more weighty material than you had at that point. So I was thinking like, okay, so these iron filings, and then sort of the magnet enters, and then, you know, when a magnet enters, they sort of, not only sort of internally do they orient themselves, but also in a group they orient themselves. So it actually like it transforms themselves, like the internal structure of the iron filing and their groupings. So then it like, yeah, the magnet enters, and then they kind of, they're grouped together, and then no more magnet, and then they start again. And then in the second time, you know, I mean, this was like a theoretical metaphorical model that I just found interesting. And then it's like, oh, the magnet's approaching. And so then like some small influence of the magnetism, and then they pop into shape. So that's another form, but it's also, yeah, it has a lot to do with repetition and sort of reuse.
You're a particle physicist.
Yeah. I talked to my friend, the physicist, about this.
Nice. So Hunter composers, please speak up. Think about this question about resources. Let's hear from you. Noah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Right. Yeah, so going off of the reduction of resources, I mean, when we talk about like instrumental music, right, like you could talk about reducing resources in terms of like how many instruments you have, right? And at times I feel like that can be easier to have that kind of framework, but I just want to say, like, as a compliment to Erin, that the voice itself is, especially once you kind of break down the structures that are more traditional, right? Like, oh, you have to have these sort of lyrics, or there has to be a melody. The voice becomes this instrument that is almost intimidating in the multitudes that it can accomplish. And so being able to find your way of reducing that into a framework where you can actually have ideas and write them down onto a page and have people perform it is amazing. And also something that, like, I don't think I've quite conceptualized how I would do that myself, because, like, I mean, obviously, yeah, I know how to write a melody and put lyrics to it, but like once you go past that and you're progressing past that, like there's so many more possibilities, but it also makes it harder to create when you don't know how to put that into a framework to make it work like you figured out. And so I think it's really interesting. One of the most interesting things for me when listening and seeing your music and everything was, I don't know what my takeaway would be from that, whether it is with vocal music or instruments, and kind of different ways of looking at how to reduce my resources in a way that is the most creative. So
yeah.
It wasn't much of a question as much as a compliment, but
No, it's good.
It's very nice. Yeah, I think I was gonna oh, I know that, I mean, it is, everything you said is, it's true, and it was all difficult. It was all, I think,
Thank you for admitting that. Writing music is hard.
Yes, writing music is hard. Yes. You know, and it is a kind of a, like a, I mean, I don't want to be dramatic about it, but like a survival strategy, in the sense that, like, you know, it's like, I was really nervous about writing Mouthpiece 1. I put a lot of pressure on myself. I didn't know what I was doing. I wanted to write something that I liked. And yeah, and I was, in a sense, like, okay, pitches, only these. Okay, form, just this. You know, I just didn't want to think about too much all at once. You know, and it was also like, for a class, deadline looming, you know. So it's interesting that, like, because we just, at some point, we have to make our artistic choices, and we just have to make them. Choice. And I sometimes do the best when I'm just like, okay, choice making machine, start making your choices. And there it is. Yeah.
Well, one of the profound choices that you made, I think, and you described this really well, was letting go of the idea of having to be a bel canto trained singer in order to use your voice. And like I don't know if you realized what the effect of that was going to be, what you were going to be able to uncover when you let go of the outside pressure of what the voice is supposed to be by a standard that we have inherited, in a conservatory system of music training. So you created a space for yourself by liberating this idea of bel canto and just taking that off the table. Like you knew you weren't going to do it. You weren't going to try to do it. And so therefore, yes, 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 no. And that was a big no, it allowed everything else to happen.
Yeah.
And I wonder about that.
Well, of course, like the way was paved. I mean, the Schritters, I had heard that, I'm sure. I don't know. I guess it, maybe it always feels like the way is paved, someone else.
Yes.
You're like,
yeah, of
oh,
course.
yeah, this can't be that far away from the other thing that was already done, and then the getting in the barrio, and it's like, well, not exactly that. What about this other thing? And
well, barrio, and actually I think that's right behind my head, aria. John Cage aria. Yeah. I mean, but barrio was still drawing on a bel canto tradition. It was an expansive one, and you inserted yourself on your own terms into that space.
Yeah.
Do you guys think about that? Do you think about letting go of what it means to do something in a bel canto way, composers? Does that come into your mind at all? Do you feel bel canto pressure?
Probably a little bit.
I think it's kind of there psychologically for all of us, probably.
Yeah, I think it's
right?
like through the conditioning of like
Yes.
how we've grown up listening to
Yes.
so much of it,
Yes.
right? And
Right.
it finds its way to condition other forms of music. And so I think there's something really liberating about going away from that, but also intimidating because the rules are so unwritten that you're just like, I got to make this choice for me and nobody else can really say anything. So
the tyranny of Bellini. Yes. I mean, I love bel canto singing. It for me, feeling like it's a thing rather than the only thing is both liberating and also sort of makes me love it more because it puts it in a special place. To have a voice that can do that requires all of these years and all of this training and all of this work, and you're learning how to move, you're learning how to breathe, you're learning how to do all these things and exist in different languages and all of that. And it is really magical, and project above an orchestra, all of those things. It's incredible and it's so special. And it's a thing, and it just doesn't have to be the only thing. It is a way. It's a very special way,
And the first person that I taught this piece, the first mouthpiece to, was a student, an opera student at the University of Iowa, and she performed it so well. And she had the best breath control that I did not have.
Right.
And it was, she memorized it. It was epic. I mean, it was all just, it was really amazing. And I taught it to her by rote. For a month, we sat together and Yeah,
that's really profound. That's great. Yeah. Wow, that's so interesting. Other thoughts from the group? Do you think part of your language, I loved your comment about allophones and the boundary of sound, because you're stopping it so quickly, as to produce as almost a microscopic element, right? But it's also on a boundary of meaning, because we're getting enough sounds that look like language, that feel like language. And so do you think part of what happens to us when we hear your music is that we are striving to make sense of it in a semantic way? And are you thinking about that when you write? Are you thinking about meaning in that old-fashioned way through language?
Mostly what I'm thinking about is that I'm not hitting any sort of big emotional markers. That was a rule from the beginning. of, I mean, the obvious, the sigh, the sob, the laugh that we hear in Ligeti and Barrio. So avoiding those, but it's not just those. I mean, it's very tricky to avoid any kind of like big emotional marker, because we're listening for that.
Yes.
Constantly. We want to hear what's going on.
Yes.
So that I find difficult, and in the relation to the language is also the same. And I find myself often just hoping I'm not hitting on
Yeah, I can imagine.
I definitely am in
Yeah.
some,
Yeah. Yeah, you have to be. Yeah.
I heard even one thing in French just as I was listening to this last time. And some other people have said to me, oh, my 5-year-old son definitely heard this word in there,
Oh, hilarious.
Yeah. So that it's I'm continually humbled by the impossibility of but yeah, like I said.
Associating meaning with the sounds and hitting on a few choice words, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Adam, sure. Could you ask your question?
I'm thrilled.
Yay.
First, I just want to say, Erin, I love your music. I've been digging through it and finding so many pieces that I'm just fascinated with. On the topic of language and deconstructing the text, are there any texts you look for specifically? Like I noticed you use a lot of Sanskrit, drawing from the Upanishads. Do you find yourself drawn to any specific texts when you're deconstructing them?
I mean, I don't know. So those are interesting because I was simply just I just needed a model of structure, a model for structure. And I happen to know the texts, and I don't know Sanskrit. So it was kind of like a perfect other situation in which meaning was not going to rear its ugly head very much. I don't know what each of those words really means. And so that was helpful, and that wasn't, so I didn't, it was helpful for a structural model, and that's how I really thought of it, as opposed to, I think it just helped me not to think of it as like, okay, I'm breaking down this language, I'm breaking down this phrase, but I'm just removing this structure that happens to be here, and I'm going to use it over here. And it just helped me make a lot of choices. And I've done that again more recently, but not with any text at all, but I did an improvisation, and then I put it, I was actually building electronic music, and I put it below, and I muted it, and I sort of rebuilt it. And so I guess this kind of, again, it's like reduction of choices. Like I'm rebuilding. I've already made a lot of these choices, and now I'm sort of rebuilding something that already exists. So I like this sort of structure, the model structure, I think, as a kind of a tool. Is that helpful?
Yeah, that was super helpful. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, good question.
David?
Yes. Hi, Erin. When we're talking, I sort of want to go back just for a moment about reduction of resources, because it's such a fascinating topic for us composers. And when I think about the aesthetic, and when I think about your story, I see this beautiful collision of performer composer, then composing for performer and performing. So it's sort of this interesting dialogue that you're having with yourself in all of this, in this process, and I think by choosing the intense material, and I use the word intense because it's so bright and vivid all of the time, and so much of your work shines so brightly like that. And whether it's for a single instrument or mouthpiece 9, which is for larger instrumentation, the orchestration, in a way, it's extremely personal. I mean, it's so individual, yet it speaks about the form, and it speaks about your overall conception of sound. And I think, when we were talking about bel canto a few moments ago, and sort of a preconceived notion of perhaps a sound platform, you have avoided that by creating your own world of sound. And therefore, by doing so, you've built, in many ways, your own tools. You've built your own sonic pillars, you've built your own formal pillars, and so forth. And this sort of harks back to a fascinating conversation I was having with some of our composers last week, particularly with Nehemiah and Alyssa and Catherine, and Adam too, when we were talking about reducing sort of basic elements of musical construction, whether they be in the domain of pitch or rhythm or the temporal domain or something like this. When one is confining the sort of, I should say, the amount of material, the light sort of gets brighter on and more intensified on those fewer elements. And therefore, we as composers can exploit their potential in a greater degree. And I think your music is such a sublime example of that, because you are working with tools that you made. And so I wonder if we can begin a short dialogue with our composers, particularly those who I just sort of mentioned, and composers, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but you also know how much I'd love to engage you in conversations like this. I sort of want to talk a little bit about designing a platform whereby, you're at the beginning of a piece, you're outlining your materials. And, I've said this a number of times when we as composers start a piece, we're sort of like chefs in many ways. And we sort of put a few ingredients in the pots and the pans and the saute pans, and we sort of see what works, right? And we don't necessarily use every ingredient in the toolbox, every ingredient in the cupboard or in the refrigerator. We are very selective as composers, simply because we want to make sure that our message is uncompromising in some ways, and that we are able to say what we want to say. And I'm wondering if you could speak, I guess this is my second question for you. I wonder if we could speak just for a moment about being able to tell a story. And whenever I hear your pieces, I'm very much aware that every piece is its own world. And yes, there is a sort of connectivity to the aesthetic, but in many ways you start from a blank slate. And so I would love to hear more about that.
Yeah, should I speak, or do the students want to?
It would be great if the Hunter composers could think about limiting resources, and if that has worked for them, or if this is something that they are experimenting with in their work, or if they never thought of it before. Adam?
So I deal with that kind of thing all the time, honestly, because one of my problems with composition in general is like the vast void of infinite possibility, especially when you're working with the voice or piano or even your own instrument that you have a reasonable amount of facility on. So, for example, I've been working on these piano pieces where I take small chunks of rhythm and I apply numbers to them, and I run them through a random number generator to kind of generate these motives or extended phrases, and plug those together with different kinds of pitch to come up with a product. And in a way, I'm, rather than trying to just come up with these things on the fly and saying, this is what I'm going to use, or at least rather than creating the whole thing at once, I guess, I come up with tiny ingredients. I have to go back to the cooking metaphor that Professor Fulmer used earlier. And I allow chance to do it, kind of like John Cage might, or even an aleatoric piece. might do. And then I construct it from there, maybe tweaking it here and there, depending on how I'm feeling, or adding additional resources along the way as the ideas develop on their own.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, that's great.
As it kind of starts to talk back to you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Sometimes one contour might work better with a rhythm than the one I originally had. And something I might revisit later in the piece, or vice versa. Something works later that I could use earlier.
Nice.
Yeah, that's great. I like the listening gives you more information about what materials to use. So it's like the more you bring the elements together, then they tell you what other elements or to use or how to look at them. Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah, so it's a great jumping off point.
Yeah, great.
Thanks, Adam. Alyssa, you have something to add along these lines?
Yes, so I agree with Adam, and at the same time, I'm completely different. I will not try to use a random number like generator to write a piece, because I just love to have this control over what I'm writing. But I will, for example, choose. Right now, I'm writing a cello piece, and I decided to only write using Messiaen third mode of transposition, and it helps me to like figure out where I'm going. Just having this limitation is just one limitation, but it helps me have some more consistency or like form in my head, at least. I don't know if that makes any sense, but I'm not going to try to have random things dictate what I'm putting into the music. I don't know if that makes sense. Maybe one day I will, but I'm not there yet. I just want to write exactly what I hear in my head. So I usually just pick one rule that I have to follow, and then the rest just writes itself.
It's almost like a transcription more than a
Yes.
game. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Fascinating.
great. Yeah.
We got a really great question from the YouTube live from Stephen Spencer. He's a composer at the Graduate Center. He's asking, could you talk more about aspiration and breath in your music?
Oh yeah. Yes, that's a good one. So I think I should probably also, with that, talk about the amplification
Yeah.
that I need to, particularly if I'm with an ensemble and I use two microphones, and I have the sung tones into one microphone and the pops and the clicks and the whispered sounds into the other. And for the whistle, I kind of I try to avoid aspirating into the microphone. um, so the aspiration, interestingly, that just popped into my head because I really have to control it, and I have to control microphone use. I had to really work on my microphone use in relation to how air is coming out of my mouth. But on the same time, you heard me say that I really like fricatives, which means that you're constricting and you're really pushing a lot of air out of a small space. And so back to the question of aspiration, maybe so I might take that question to mean like maybe to talk about the unvoiced sounds. Now, but feel free, Stephen, to write in if you wanted me to talk about some other thing. Yeah, so the unvoiced sounds, I really wanted to develop that world quite a bit, and also to maintain, to have a high degree of difficulty. That's just something that I sort of enjoyed working on, and a lot of energy. But at the same time, this is key that it also, I refrain from sort of big emotional markers. Would they also come up and whisper? I mean, if you start whispering with a vengeance, it's gonna have a real like strong emotional tint to what you're doing. So I tried as well with the unvoiced sounds to keep it very, very light and fast, and the kind of the articulations of the teeth and the tongue are sort of points that kind of pop in and out. It's funny. This is a great question. I've never really been asked before. So and that, yeah, so that was there from the beginning of kind of, how is this unvoiced, but a lot of it you can hear like there's a real connection. So like, for example, all of these kinds of voiced fricatives, I like to have a lot of air in them, to push a lot of air that through it, because it makes it more unstable and it gives me a more complex sound, and it can relate more quickly to different instruments. So like if I'm pressing more air through this kind of a sound, then I'm relating on the one hand to the styrofoam that's going like, but also to a low clarinet sound or a quiet trumpet that has a closed wah-wah mute on it or something. So yeah, I guess it's kind of like how many different timbral worlds can I have in that one instant that I'm like doing whatever I'm doing with that voice. And then also I wanted to have some moments where I do have like held longer pitches, and I really had to train my breath control to get those, and that helps with those those fricatives help because you're pushing back on the sound, so you can sort of hold the sound longer, or I should say the unvoiced sound. I hope that's answering the question.
That sounds pretty good. I think if I know Stephen, I think that you just gave him a lot to think about. He works in a similar way. Yeah, very good question. And there's a really beautiful, interesting question about your tonal language from my colleague, Jeff Nichols. Jeff, would you like to ask it? Or would you like me to ask it for you? If you're in a position to unmute and ask, go ahead. I'll wait like a second and I'll just keep talking like this. And there you are. Yes, yay.
You made a reference when you were talking about a Bach quotation up to, I think you used the words, the unraveling of tonal language. And just before you said that, I had made a note that I often feel listening to your music like I'm listening to some kind of modality refracted through a mirror. And then you were talking about this dirty mirror, small dirty mirror. And I've got a whole raft of questions also about form, but I was specifically wondered if you would talk a little bit about how you make pitch choices. And do you think, I mean, your pitch language is so clear and also so directed. I feel like you take us places, and certain events happen uniquely only at one place in a piece, like in Mouthpiece 28, there's a place where perfect fifths start to emerge, and they haven't been there before. So I just wonder if you could talk a little bit about how you think about those kinds of choices.
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I think it first started to develop for me in Mouthpiece 7, and I was talking about this choice to use just dyads, and then when there were 3 notes, it was a big event. So that was like an early choice, an early construction that that I don't know, kind of spurred different kinds of thinking. That and so when you get to like Mouthpiece 28, yeah. Well, the other thing I want to say about dyads that I enjoyed so much is that you can, they have a lot of tonal implication, which you can undermine extremely quickly. I love them for that. And that's what I was doing, really. And I think that has continued to be something that is important to me, where, and it, yeah, actually no one has ever asked me this before. So it's hard to actually pinpoint, but I have gone through back, like, so a lot of it is sort of intuitive, like, okay, I know, like, oh, where do I want to go? Where else can I go? Those are the 2 questions. And the balance, I think, is very important to me. And balance. So like I talked about, Mouthpiece 7 and some things, I think those things, some things that started to emerge there, I just like needed to work on in many other pieces after that. But the other thing that emerged in Mouthpiece 7 is the balance issue. So you heard me say, like, I want to have like a static with a lot of surface activity. So I had to balance it very carefully. And it's the same with these consonants and dissonants and the dyads and the things, because a perfect fifth can only occur if I've had enough of some other thing that it won't tip the balance when I use it. And then I can use something else that won't tip the balance somewhere else. But you see, it's the same thing when I'm choosing vocal sounds. I can't tip the balance. I can't be overly dramatic or like to this or to that, because I don't want to tip the emotional balance either. I just want it to be open, like a container.
But are you possibly sometimes deliberately hinting at possible arrivals and tippings of the balance and weightings while never quite going there? But okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes it's even much stronger. Like even in the first movement of Mouthpiece 9, there's some much stronger tippings. I'm really like, whoa.
But
so
the listener can't expect when it will happen.
Yeah. I think that is true. And and I enjoy that. And that's, I don't know, but so Mouthpiece 28, it's so great that you said, because that I did not make a choice like, oh my gosh, I bet I can put a perfect fifth here. But I think that the way that I write, there's a lot of like I'm learning the piece as I'm going, just like I had to do with the Mouthpiece 1. I had to learn it in order to write it, because I couldn't actually even really notate it at that point. So maybe there's something like, I have to like get it all in my ear. Like we all do this as composers. It's like, is it in there? Is it in there? Okay, where can I go now? And it's that kind of like gut feeling of like where you can go. Yeah. Great question. Yeah, that's amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So good. I love thinking about that. I want to take that beyond this evening in terms of the tipping point too, because you just stay right on this very, I can't even say where the field is, but you've created it and you stay on the edge of falling off, but never, and leaning and going in directions. And it's even just virtuosity is one of those things where you're tipping toward a kind of virtuosity, a kind of like oxygen depletion that you could sort of easily get to if you wanted to really like drive that home. You could do that and you could get there. But instead you kind of stay in this almost Baroque virtuosity that hovers and is very intricate and subtle, and you don't push it over into that kind of world. And I really appreciate that too, because that is a sort of an emotional trigger too, like, oh, this is now we've gone from difficult and expert and all this to crazy hard, and aren't we now focused on this individual you? And I guess that's part of your practice of trying not to be in the center. Aren't we now focused on what's happening to the body of this person and how that's even possible?
Yeah, that you totally hit it. That was another big constriction. I didn't want it ever to seem difficult.
Yes.
I wanted it to sound like it was easy.
Yes.
I just practiced for 4 months straight.
Yes. Yes. It never sounds, it always sounds like, wow, this person has refined and worked at making this sound really easy, but it flows out like a ribbon. It's not like we're waiting for that super athletic moment where you're gonna stage dive or something. But we have those moments, and even in our world of sort of contemporary music where like now it's about the body and how far I can go. And I mean, and that's been part of the, for certainly in romantic time. Yes.
And I think, yes, and I want to say yes, and in the final, edits or practicing or whatever, things got cut. If it was too awkward or too hard, or I couldn't,
Mhm.
or,
Mhm.
you know, so
Mhm.
I like
Mhm.
that. I like that notion. And just as a side note, I always keep that open for my performers.
Hmm.
And one
Hmm.
great performer in, you know, in Vienna when I was working, and then we were starting the rehearsal process, and she said, "And now begins the negotiations." I just always love that. I always
Yeah.
love it. It's like,
Yeah.
yes, we begin negotiating now.
Yes.
And
Yes.
that's, you know, telling
Yes.
you, you know, let's negotiate.
Yes.
So I like to
I
extend.
love that too. Yeah. Yeah. It feels alive. It feels like you're working with other humans, and
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah. And it's nice that you're showing us again that the composer doesn't have to be at arm's length from the world, and we're not off in some corner totally alone. We're interacting with other humans and learning from them, and
Mhm.
creating new instruments by practice, by trial and error and experimentation.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, I hope that everyone can think now about what paths we might be able to forge for ourselves, as Erin has demonstrated so poetically for us.
Mhm.
And wow, Erin, it's just such a pleasure to have you here, to
Oh,
see
that was so
you.
wonderful. Thank you. That was
Yes.
great questions. I love talking to everyone. Thank you so much for your insights and questions. And yeah, I look forward to hearing your music and hearing from you in the future.
That would be great. We should make that possible.
Yeah, yeah.
All right. So I'm going to clap now if anyone wants to join me. Thank you, Erin.
Yeah.
Great. I hope to see you really soon, and all of you out there. And it's just wonderful to be a community.
Yes, thank you. Have a
Okay.
great
Have
evening,
a good
everyone.
night. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.